Chapter 6. Tuesday, 17th of April, 2012. Turbulence shook Simon Sonny Baines awake. He opened his eyes to see Len Smart next to him reading a detective mystery on his Kindle, oblivious to the chaos. It wasn't until an overhead locker broke open and disgorged its contents into the aisle that he tore himself away from the gripping story. Although they had left Amsterdam Schiphol Airport an eternity earlier, according to Sonny's watch, they were still 6 hours from Manila. The flight from Heathrow had been a short hop, and after a 3-hour stopover, they had climbed aboard the Boeing 777-200. An hour into the flight, they'd had breakfast, which Sonny topped off with a scotch before falling into a deep sleep. Sonny never had any trouble sleeping on planes, an ability Smart had never mastered. A freezing hillside in the middle of winter was no problem, but not an airplane seat. It didn't matter whether it was a civilian airliner or a military transport. He just couldn't nod off, no matter how tired he was. "Do you think Tom will be joining us on the pickup?" he asked Sonny. "He's got a new name now," his friend reminded him in a low voice. "Yeah, right. It's hard to get used to the idea after knowing him as Tom for all those years. I wonder what name he's chosen." "I guess we'll find out soon enough. What are you reading?" "Black Beast by R.S. Guthrie." "Any good?" "Brilliant," Smart said, and promptly turned his attention back to the Kindle. Sonny shoved a pair of headphones over his ears and scanned the channels on the in-flight entertainment console, settling for an episode of Mr. Bean. But as the plane cruised over Central Asia, he quickly lost interest in the show. Instead, he recalled the last time he had seen Tom. It had been in the ruins of the old pottery factory that Tom had transformed into a fortress until Abdul Mansour and his men had attacked and reduced it to rubble. Tom's plan to seek retribution against the boy who'd killed his son had been audacious and had almost succeeded. It also nearly cost him his life. It would be good to see his old friend again, Sonny thought, and closed his eyes to sleep away the rest of the flight. It seemed just moments later when Len woke him. "We'll be landing in 15 minutes, Smart said, stowing his Kindle in his rucksack. Sonny paid a quick visit to the toilet and then stopped by the galley to chat up the stewardesses. Despite being in his mid-30s, he looked 10 years younger and hadn't seemed to age a day since joining the SAS as one of their youngest recruits. The name Sonny soon stuck, and he used his boyish good looks at every opportunity, with varying degrees of success. On this occasion, he struck out and resumed his seat, staring out of the window as they approached Ninoy Aquino International Airport. After touching down, they made their way through immigration and picked up their luggage, a suitcase each packed with items most of which they were never likely to use. It was just easier to throw some jeans and t-shirts into a case than explain why they were arriving for a holiday without a change of clothes. As promised, they were met at the exit. A Filipino in a white shirt and black trousers held up a card with their names as they fought through the crowd of taxi drivers looking for a chance to charge unsuspecting foreigners 10 times the normal fare. Len and Sonny introduced themselves and were led out into the sunshine. The first thing that hit them was the smell, like a combination of sewage and rotting food. As they walked to the pickup area, the heat added to their woes, and they were thankful when they climbed into the air-conditioned SUV. It took close to an hour to get the 3 miles to their destination near the British Embassy in Makati. Manila has some of the most congested roads in the world, despite government efforts to keep the traffic flowing. Vehicle number plates end with a number, and each day 2 of those numbers were banned from the road. Despite this measure, journeys were most often made at a steady crawl at best. Along the way, they had to contend with a variety of ancient trucks, buses and cars. Now and again, they would spot a brand new vehicle that seemed very out of place. At each set of traffic lights, their transport was assaulted by vendors or beggars, often 7-year-old girls carrying a baby and dressed in rags, holding out a hand in the hope of $1 or $2. The SUV pulled into an underground car park below a 30-storey office block. The driver opened the door for them, then led them to an elevator which took them to the 17th floor. The door at the end of the corridor proclaimed the office to belong to Knight Logistics Management, and they were shown into the reception where a lady in her 50s asked them to take a seat. A few moments later, a connecting door opened, and Farrar ushered them into his office, pointing towards a sofa as he sat on the corner of his desk. They dumped their luggage and took a seat. "Gentlemen, thank you for coming at such short notice," he said. The pleasantries out of the way, he laid out the details of the mission. "Sam Grant has been kidnapped by Abu Sayyaf, a Muslim terrorist group operating in the southern Philippine Islands. I want you to get him out." "Who's Sam Grant?" Smart asked. Sorry, I forgot you didn't know. Sam Grant is the name Tom Gray goes by these days." He paused to let the news sink in, and it came as something of a shock to Sonny and Len. "I guess that answers the question, is Tom coming with us?" Len thought. "How did he get kidnapped?" he asked. "I don't know all the details," Farrar admitted, "but whatever happened, I'm beginning to wonder if he's up to the job he's been chosen for." "Tom still has what it takes," Sonny said quickly. "If he was kidnapped, it was because he knew that trying to fight his way out was a waste of time. He'll be working on an escape, I guarantee it." "Does he know we're coming?" Len asked, changing the subject in an attempt to diffuse the tension in the room. Farrar shared the message he'd relayed the previous evening, and they agreed that in all likeliness Tom knew a rescue was going to be attempted. "You said you'd have some equipment for us," Len said, and Farrar retrieved a long sports holdall from a closet. Inside, they found 2 Heckler & Koch MP5SD suppressed submachine guns, a pair of Beretta M9 pistols, and 2 American M4 carbine rifles with underslung M203 grenade launchers. In addition, there was ammunition, plus night vision goggles, a smartphone, and a communication set comprising throat microphones and earpieces. "These comm units use 2048-bit encryption and flash burst the messages, so they're very hard to intercept or decrypt." Flash bursting meant compressing the whole message into a tiny blob of data and sending it when the user finished talking. So rather than anyone being able to hear their real-time conversation, eavesdroppers would simply hear a millisecond burst of static. "The phone will give your current location as well as the location of Sam's phone." He opened an application and they saw a map of the Philippines with a green dot flashing over their current location in Manila and a red cross on one of the southern islands. The map lacked topography, showing just the land masses as brown to the sea's blue. A scale on the right-hand side of the screen showed the distance between the 2 locations. "How up-to-date is Tom's location?" Len asked. "Sam's location," Farrar said, emphasising the new name, "will be real-time just as long as his phone is turned on. Abu Sayyaf have agreed to call me at 3 in the afternoon each day, so we know it will be updated at least once every 24 hours. He used his thumb and forefinger to expand the image with the red cross and hit a symbol at the top of the screen, which showed a dot-to-dot red trail. "These are Sam's movements since they first made contact with me. It looks like they traversed the high ground and are heading towards the coast." "Do we know the enemy's strength, numbers, weapons, anything at all?" "Nothing whatsoever. You'll be going in blind with just a cross on a map as your guide. Is there a problem with that?" Len and Sonny looked at each other and had the same thought. This was a clusterfuck waiting to happen. "What is it with people's perception of the SAS?" Sonny asked. "Why does everyone think we're invincible superheroes? We only get the job done because we do our homework and know what we're facing, not by jumping in with our eyes closed and nothing but a mean expression and a huge set of balls." There was no animosity in his voice, a touch of sarcasm perhaps, but no animosity. Farrar, however, chose to take it completely the wrong way. "I'm beginning to wonder if anyone from your beloved regiment is capable of conducting a real mission these days," he said, eyes directed towards Sonny. "In case you didn't know, I called you as soon as I found out that he'd been kidnapped. That was only 28 hours ago, and considering we don't have any assets down there, and given the fact that I haven't been able to have a private conversation with him to get any first-hand intel, it is impossible to know anything about what you will be facing. But then, you'd know that if you were smart." "He's smart," Sonny said, pointing to Len. "I'm pragmatic, and this has nothing to do with being capable of conducting a real mission. This is about the 7 Ps. Proper, prior planning prevents piss-poor performance." Len put a hand on his friend's arm to calm him down. "We've been in worse situations," he said to Sonny, then turned to Farrar. "We'll do it, but the price just went up. 30,000 on completion, each." 20, Farrar countered. 25. "Done. There's a plane waiting to fly you to Zamboanga, but you'll have to make your own way from there. My driver will take you back to the airport and show you through the diplomatic channel, so you'll avoid having to check in the bag. My secretary will provide you with the necessary passes." He stood and ushered them out of his office, handing Sonny the bag after they'd collected their own luggage. As promised, there were 2 name badges waiting for them on the secretary's desk, each complete with a recent photo. "My number is programmed into that phone, which uses satellite rather than 3G, so you should have a signal wherever you are," Farrar said. "I'll keep you updated if there are any developments." The driver was waiting in the hallway to take them back to the car park. "I would have done it for the original $5,000, Sonny said to Len as they walked towards the elevator. "It's Tom," Len replied. "I would have done it for nothing." When he was alone in his office, Farrar checked his watch and calculated the time it would take them to arrive on Basilan and make their way into the jungle. The ideal scenario was for them to be within sight of Grant before he gave their location away, but unless they fed him regular updates, he doubted he would get to know when they were close enough. He decided to wait until Bong called him tomorrow for his 3 o'clock conversation with Grant and break the news then. He would then have the location and could guide them to an ambush. It wasn't as if they were likely to manage a rescue in the meantime, not with the ammunition he'd supplied. Any soldier with as much time on the range as the SAS had would be able to tell when all the explosive propellant had been removed from a bullet, so the powder in the rounds he'd given them had been replaced with plain old sand. Figuring that they would have no reason to fire their weapons until they got into a battle with Abu Sayyaf, he had no concerns about them discovering his little subterfuge until it was too late. The only thing that could scupper his plans would be if they found Grant as soon as they landed on the island. But if the AFP and US Special Forces had trouble locating anyone from Abu Sayyaf, he was damn sure a couple of ex-soldiers, no matter how good they once were, would find it a struggle to locate them. With Baines, Smart and Grant out of the way, he could then turn his attention to the 2 remaining conspirators, Carl Levine and Jeff Campbell. They would demand some kind of explanation as to why their friends had disappeared, which was the reason he'd videotaped the conversation they'd just had. That would keep them quiet for a while, giving him the chance to put together a plan to eliminate them and close down the operation. After that, he would finally be free to return home to England and be done with this terrible climate once and for all. He knew he would have to be quick, though, as having 5 friends die within a year would be seen as too much of a coincidence, especially when these 5 knew something that could cause serious embarrassment to the government. The deaths of Barker, Fink and Bennett would arouse little suspicion on their own, but when Baines and Smart disappeared along with Grant, he was sure Campbell and Levine would begin asking questions. This made their demise all the more critical, so he went to his computer, entered his password to open the secure file, and began reading up on the preparations for their deaths. He knew that Campbell had booked a holiday in Florida for himself, his wife, and his 3 children, and would be leaving in 9 days. So he was the priority target. The surveillance operation had noted a few of his most common habits, including the darts night at his local pub, the Wheatsheaf, every Wednesday evening. He also went jogging at 7 o'clock every morning, and these 2 opportunities were the ones the team were currently working on. The last updates to his file were his UK team's 3 suggestions for the takedown. Dismissing the first 2, a hit-and-run accident and a common pub fight, as too obvious and risky, he pondered the 3rd option. They wanted to fake a burglary and kill him in the process. A man of his nature would surely try to defend his family, the team suggested, and they could kill him when he tried. Farrar wasn't so sure. If Campbell didn't resist and just let them take his possessions, the team would have no reason to kill him. If they did kill him under those circumstances, his family would surely know that he was the real target, and they would have to be silenced too, which was something he didn't want to contemplate. Not yet, at least. Adding a note to the team to come up with some other options by the end of the day, he closed Campbell's file and moved on to the next one. Levine, too, was a creature of habit. Twice a week he went skydiving at the local airport, and the team had managed to get one of their number into his Tuesday evening sessions. Like Levine, their man was an ex-paratrooper, and through that common bond they had become friends over the last 4 weeks. Their report said he was now in a position to gain access to Levine's rig, with a view to sabotaging it. Farrar didn't understand the intricacies of how they intended to sabotage the parachute, but they assured him that both the main and reserve would fail to operate on the last dive of the day. Their man would beg off that last jump, claiming to have a prior engagement, and as he had used a false name, belonging to a real ex-para he'd served with, and the licence plates on his car were also false, there was nothing but a description to link him to the death. Once he'd shaven off the full beard and had a haircut, the authorities would be searching for a ghost. Farrar was satisfied with the plan and gave the go-ahead to implement it the following week. Another few days, he thought, and he could finally get a proper roast beef dinner. For now, though, he had to be satisfied with a half-decent shepherd's pie from the local English pub. Chapter 7. Wednesday, 18th of April 2012. Sam Grant woke as yet another mosquito helped itself to a drink from his exposed arm. Instinctively he tried to swat it, and that was when he remembered the handcuffs. They had been produced as the sun fell the previous evening, and he had been shackled to a tree and left to sleep in a sitting position. When he asked what he was supposed to do if he needed the toilet, he was simply told to hold it until the morning. With that, his vision of a night escape had vanished, leaving him with not only dented optimism, but also a very full bladder. When one of the guards stirred close by, Grant called out to him. "Ihi, ako," he said, letting the man know he was desperate for a piss. The guard rubbed his eyes and then dug into his pocket for the keys. As he ambled past Grant, he dropped the key by the base of the tree and continued to answer his own call of nature. After a little fumbling in the early dawn light, Grant managed to free himself and stood up on legs filled with pins and needles because of his awkward sleeping position. Still, he managed to move a few steps to the edge of the clearing and finally relieve himself. The thought occurred to him that he was losing a lot of fluid and not taking much in, and if he didn't change the ratio soon, he was going to start feeling the effects. However, That wasn't his most troubling thought. The previous day, in line with Muslim tradition, the bodies of John and Abel had been buried as soon as was practical. Grant and the others had been given the task of digging the grave, while the Abu Sayyaf washed the dead and shrouded them in hammocks, these being the only white material they had. With the bodies laid to rest, their heads pointing towards Mecca, the pace of the march had picked up considerably. By the time they stopped to clear a campsite for the night, the beach was no more than 5 hours away. They would reach it long before Sonny and Len could get to the area. His only hope was that they would lie up close to the shore and wait until nightfall before boarding the boat, but that was far from guaranteed. Movement near his foot caught his eye, and he saw a 6-inch-long black millipede slink past his toes. He followed its path and watched it crawl inside a fallen tree trunk, where he noticed the particularly sharp remnants of a branch that had been snapped off, probably when it was felled. The stub of the branch gave him an idea, and he knew what he had to keep an eye out for. He rejoined the group, most of whom were already awake and preparing for another day in the jungle. Holton, in particular, was in good voice. "Who's Dina?" Vic asked, catching Grant totally off guard. "What made you ask that?" "You were saying the name over and over in your sleep," she said. "You must have been dreaming." Grant knew which dream she was referring to. It was one he had at least 3 times a week, and it never varied. He is in the car with Dina driving and Daniel in the back seat, all 3 of them heading towards the beach for a mini-break. He is enjoying the beautiful sunshine and Daniel singing, when the song suddenly stops and the sky darkens, thundery black clouds blotting out the sun. He looks in the back seat, and Daniel is flopping from side to side, his eyes lifeless. He turns to tell Dina, but she is removing her seatbelt, foot planted on the accelerator as their speed builds with each passing second. He tries calling out to her, telling her not to do it, to stay with him, but her focus is on the approaching bridge spanning the motorway. He screams her name again, and she is smiling now, not at him, but at the bridge support looming large. He tries to reach across to her, but his own seatbelt is so tight that he can't move a muscle. "Dina!" With that final scream, the dream ends, a split second before they crash headlong into the concrete pillar. "Dina was someone I knew once," he said. "It was a long time ago." "The name's familiar," she said, curiosity once more etched on her face. "It's not that unusual. I went to school with 3 girls called Dina," Grant lied. He could see Vic racking her brains for a glimmer of recollection, but he wasn't about to help her. Instead, he stood and did some stretches to try to eliminate some of the muscle knots he had accumulated during the night. In the distance, he heard the sound of a light aircraft, and moments later his captors began shouting for everyone to move to cover. Grant followed everyone's lead and jogged into the trees. He squatted down, head up in search of the plane. It passed over a minute later, a single-engine Cessna T-41B. "They fly over every few days," Moore told him nervously. "Yeah, and every time they fly over, we get attacked a few hours later," Holton added. Grant ignored the morale officer's whining and considered how he could turn this to his advantage. He searched the undergrowth for something that could be used as a weapon and found the perfect item, a twig the thickness of his thumb with a point at one end where it had been cut from a tree. It even had a growth on either side, so his hand wouldn't slip down the shaft when he used it. He slipped the 8-inch shiv into his sock and pulled his pant leg over it for concealment, careful to make sure no one noticed his movements. Once the sound of the engines died away, Bong instructed everyone to get up and start packing, seeming desperate to leave the immediate area. The group had cut down only the smaller trees to clear their campsite, leaving the canopy overhead in place, just as they had in the other camps they had made. Grant thought it unlikely that they would have been spotted from the air, but the others obviously had different opinions. Their eyes scanned the jungle as they stuffed possessions into their packs, weapons always close at hand. Within 10 minutes, they were on the move again, and Grant tried to keep pace with Dindo while trying not to make it obvious. It meant Holton had to move at the same speed, which did nothing for his demeanour. Grant found it unnerving that now and again Vic would turn and look at him with a puzzled expression, and he wondered how close she was to guessing his true identity. Given the current situation, it might not be that big a problem, he thought, especially if she didn't make it out of the jungle. However, if she managed to secure her release and shared the news with others, he knew Farah would make him disappear again, this time permanently. After 5 hours, they were within smelling distance of the sea. Grant thought his wish was going to come true when Bong ordered everyone to make camp. Through a gap in the trees, he could see a sheltered cove with a golden sandy beach. He was thankful that there was no sign of a boat, adding to his hope that they would wait until dark to transfer to the next island. As a fire was prepared and rice thrown into a pot, he realised how hungry he was, but was more intent on scanning the surrounding jungle for signs of anyone approaching. Whether it was the AFP or his two friends, he wanted to be close to one of his captors when it all kicked off. Dindo unwittingly obliged, drawn to the group by Vic's beauty. He stood to one side of her, glancing her way now and again, and both Grant and Vic knew that he was trying to get a glimpse down the front of her tattered T-shirt. Vic did nothing to obscure his view, probably afraid to lose her only real supply of nourishment. Instead, she leaned forward a little, giving Dindo a better view of her cleavage while she chatted to more. Grant judged the time to be about midday, which meant it would be another few hours before Sonny and Len were likely to turn up. With that thought still in his head, his heart sank as he saw a large banker appear at the mouth of the cove and throw out its anchor. Bong ordered everyone to prepare to move out, and the guards started packing everything away. The rice bubbling away in the pot was dumped onto the fire, extinguishing the flames and dealing yet another blow to the hostages' morale. Grant frantically sought a way to avoid boarding the boat, but the only way he saw that happening was if he was dead. So he stood when ordered to, and took his place in the line as they marched the last few 100 yards to the beach. A small motorised inflatable had been dropped over the side and was chugging towards the shore when they reached the sand, and the hostages were ordered to climb aboard. They had difficulty complying with their legs tied together. When the first 4 were in, 2 guards joined them to ferry them to the banker, then returned to escort the next lot across. Grant, Vic, Moore and Holton were the last hostages to climb into the dinghy. Sam wondered whether it would be possible to overpower the crew once on board, but again his idea was dashed as he climbed onto the larger vessel and saw 4 more armed men watching over the group of hostages already aboard. Resigned to the journey, he sat down next to Holton and prayed the banker had a well-stocked galley on board. You have been listening to Grey Resurrection, Book 2 in the Tom Gray series, written by Alan McDermott, narrated by Andy Stevenson. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to this YouTube channel so that you will be informed about new episodes as they are released.